Hi there. I don't know if you've heard, but healthcare is dangerous. Each year in the United States, 98,000 people are killed as a result of medical errors. Now, fortunately, not all of this injury is inevitable as we used to think. With an approach to investigating incidents and a formal approach to change management, you can do a lot to reduce the amount of harm that occurs to patients every year. The traditional view of medical errors was the one bad apple theory, which largely revolved around the concept that if you could just find the one person who'd made the mistake, who was usually the one who was right there at the time when it occurred, and punished them and fired them and humiliated them, and then the problem would go away and everybody else would stop making the same mistake, and at the same time, you would save patients' lives. Nowadays, though, we take a much more integrated perspective of medical errors and view them much more as a sequence of events that led to the actual event and not as a single entity of its own. Now, for example, the Challenger explosion is a sequence of events. We know that the O-ring was responsible, but it was actually not the O-ring alone that was responsible, but also the weather and the manufacturing that all contribute to this. And if you had just blamed the O-ring on this as the cause of the Challenger explosion, then manufacturing techniques wouldn't have focused much more on the actual method of production to reduce the problem of its weather and cold intolerance to prevent this from ever happening again. Critically ill patients are at much higher risk of harm as a result of medical errors. We often have to make decisions rapidly, and patients are often have incomplete information that we're working on, and so the probability of making a mistake based on this incomplete information is just that much higher. As well, the patients have an increasing level of complexity, and they also have more comorbid diseases, which also impact on their ability to tolerate any aberrations or injuries or medication errors. And then lastly, because a patient is critically ill, they by very nature have a lower physiological reserve and do not tolerate the errors as they occur, and that what one other problem or medication error that might have otherwise just caused injury to a patient in a critically ill patient may actually kill them. In the traditional model, the response to an incident and in the investigation that followed utilized the mnemonic ABCD. Now, surgeons often are very familiar with this method of investigation. ABCD is simply accuse, blame, criticize, and demean. So you find the person who was responsible, and then you apply that methodology to them. Problem solved. Now, I'll have to admit, I have no formal training in patient safety or incident investigation. And when I've tried to read about the methods that they use, often I kind of get lost in the terminology and I don't really have a clear sense. But I have friends who work in patient safety, and I've spent time talking to them. And I think at the end of the day, the methodology is pretty straightforward, but sometimes a little bit difficult to understand for the outsider. However, you're going to occasionally be asked to be involved in an incident investigation, and I think having some structure will really help. So the way I look at a critical incident is to view the event as a noun. And a noun is a person, place, or thing. Within each of the components of the person, place, or thing paradigm, there are always going to be a number of factors that have also played a role. And you don't necessarily need to have a comprehensive list at the time, but you should brainstorm a number of components within each one of these factors that may have played a role. So, for example, in the person portion of the person, place, or thing approach, you can consider problems such as personality, behavior of the people, their training, their experience levels, their overall knowledge of the situations, and also the knowledge of possible workarounds, and then also any fatigue which may have been contributing to the adverse event. As far as the place component, you need to consider a lot of the things that have occurred in the environment, and so things like noise, the environment overall in terms of crowding, location in the building, staffings and staffing ratios, The time of day can often play a role, so things like day versus night, the overall workload of the unit, distractions that may be playing a role, and then things more related outside of the individual, the environment itself, to relate to the leadership and the management structure, which all may be playing a role to how the place contributed to the adverse event. And then lastly, the things components are the actual devices which may have been responsible for the adverse event. So the infusion pump, the ventilator, the dialysis machine. As the thing has failed, you could consider things such as the interface and what influence the interface had on the adverse event, the alarm system, the messages that people receive when they're having problems with the system or when there is an error, the overall usability of the device itself, the color schemes that they may be using, fonts, and also whether there's any fail-safes or guardrails that help prevent problems. Only in analyzing an event can you truly take those things which we'd considered inevitable errors and make them preventable, and then taking those that are preventable and making them not occur ever again. If you don't have any form of feedback, you don't have any method of follow-up, you have no safety, and you have no learning. And even when you have a system in place, you need to make sure you have a process in place to allow your learnings to stick. And this falls under the rubric of change management. Now, change management is one of those concepts which has been rife in business for many, many years. It's used conceptually as a way of trying to get businesses that need to make changes, make them stick, so that they can evolve and grow as a company. You can use some of the methodologies that have been developed in change management in healthcare, and especially you can use it whenever you're trying to make changes to try to prevent medical errors. This is based on Kotter and his work in the book Leading Change, which I would recommend you take out of the library or even just buy it and get a good read through it, because it goes through all of these steps in a lot more detail. Basically, change management starts by first creating and establishing a sense of urgency. Now, if there's been a problem and a patient incident occurred, that urgency is usually already self-evident. Now, once you've created that sense of urgency, you need to build a guiding coalition of people who are leaders and have enough power in order to lead the change. Once you've developed the guiding coalition, you then need to sit down and actually come up with a vision and a strategy. These are important, and I'm not talking about creating a vision statement like you see people do on those business retreats. I'm talking about a vision for how you're going to make this change occur and the strategy for implementing it. Your vision will guide your change effort, where your strategy will help you achieve the vision. Once you've established your vision and your strategy, then it's time to start communicating the strategy. Communicating this with everybody in the organization is critical, and it needs to be a continuous communication so that people know that we are not only serious about the change, but this change is inevitable. The guiding coalition also has to be responsible for taking the lead and actually modeling the behavior that needs to be changed, so people will know that this is expected and what they should be doing in the future. Once you started communicating the vision and modeling it, you need to now also start empowering people to make changes as well. And you need to empower broad-based actions. This includes things like getting rid of any obstacles that people bring up as reasons why they can't make the change, and also find the things that are undermining the change within your system. You need to be encouraging, and you need to encourage people to take risks if necessary in order to make the change stick. With this, the next step is to then generate some short-term wins. Now, this seems like a bit of a manipulation, but really the fact is, in human psychology, if you don't have some early feedback and positive feedback on an endeavor, people will tend to drift and change won't stick. So you should build into your plan of change to have early wins so you can have a way of encouraging people and showing them that there is visible improvements that can occur very early on. This needs to be done deliberately, however. You then also need to visibly recognize and reward people who have been on board with making the changes and who model the change, as well as those people who have made this early win possible. Once you've got your early wins in the bag, you next need to consolidate your gains and produce more change. You need to use these wins as increased credibility in order to make changes to other portions of the system, and as well, it will help you reinvigorate the process by hopefully bringing on new people who initially may have been resistant and who can now act as change agents. This at this point may require some changes in your project, and you need to sit down and reevaluate where you're going to make sure that you're still making the gains that you wanted. Once you've headed into the home stretch and you feel like you've made all of the necessary changes, you need to anchor and embed this change into the culture so that it sticks for good. One of the important ways you can do this is by making sure that the leadership is not only responsible for invoking the change, but their performance and their rewards are tied necessarily to the changes that have been made. So, for example, if you believe that reducing your central line infection rate to 0 is important, then one thing you need to do after you've gone through a change process is to make sure that the medical leadership is responsible not only for invoking and continuing the change, but they're rewarded and they understand it is part of their incentive program to keep those numbers as low as possible. Patients continue to suffer and experience harm in our hospitals every day. Failure to change and properly investigate only continues and perpetuates this cycle. But using rigorous investigations and effective change management processes will ultimately lead to better patient outcomes for all of us. Thank you.